We have breaking news, MS Now, with exclusive reporting that a federal grand jury in Maryland is now investigating two Trump administration officials, Federal Housing Finance Agency Director Bill Pulte and DOJ pardon attorney Ed Martin. Now, the investigation centers on whether they appointed unauthorized people to help with mortgage fraud investigations of California Democratic Senator Adam Schiff and New York Attorney General Letitia James. Joining us with their exclusive reporting, MS Now's Ken Delanian and Carol Lenig. Carol, let's start with laying out exactly what you've learned about this investigation.
So, Chris, a federal grand jury in Greenbelt, Maryland, has begun subpoenaing records and documents, and FBI agents have begun interviewing individuals about the way in which Bill Pulte, the Federal Housing Finance Chair, and Ed Martin, a DOJ official who used to be the U.S. Attorney in Maryland before he was removed from that office.
Okay, so we need to talk about what just exploded in federal court, because this is one of the most dramatic courtroom moments in the entire Trump legal saga. A federal judge named Marianne Keller just unsealed a massive trove of files that Trump and his legal team have been fighting to keep hidden for months. We're talking about financial records that allegedly don't add up, communications about January 6th security that suggest illegal directives, secret transcripts between Trump advisors and legislative staff, grand jury materials, and what's being described as bribery ledgers showing hush payments. This is the kind of evidence that prosecutors dream about and defendants have nightmares about. And when Judge Keller announced her decision to make all of this public, overriding Trump's claims of executive privilege and national security concerns, Trump apparently lost it completely. He stormed out of the courtroom in protest, just got up and left while the judge was still speaking, and the fallout has been immediate and explosive. Congress is demanding new criminal investigations. Some members are calling for Trump's arrest. Even some Republicans are saying the evidence is too serious to ignore. This isn't just another legal setback for Trump. This is a potential game changer that exposes conduct he's been desperate to keep hidden. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
We have another installment in our special report as we go through these emails, evidence, and facts. This one is on some of the other powerful figures ensnared by these early Epstein files. The emails are the expected tranche of part of what is the larger Epstein files. Last night, you may recall, we showed you some of that footage of Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein, which now looks a lot worse when we see their secret private emails leaked about rehabilitating Jeffrey Epstein's reputation. Why did such a top Trump ally want to do that? Well, we have more for you. Volume 2 tonight. That's coming up. But I begin right now with something you know about that's only getting worse since it happened. We have the reporting here on President Trump's clearly worst week this year, that bipartisan rebuke from Congress on a key vulnerability, forcing the coming release of the Epstein files.
So let's set the scene here, because understanding what led to this moment helps explain why it's so significant. Trump and his lawyers have been fighting in court for months to keep certain documents sealed. Their arguments were that these files contain sensitive national security information, that they were protected by executive privilege, that releasing them would compromise ongoing investigations or violate privacy rights. Basically, they threw every legal argument they could think of at the wall, hoping something would stick. And for a while, the judge allowed the files to remain sealed while she considered the arguments. But apparently, Judge Keller reviewed the actual contents of the sealed files and concluded that Trump's justifications for keeping them secret were bogus. She found that the public interest in transparency outweighed all of the concerns Trump's team raised. And in her ruling, she said something really significant. The public interest outweighs all of that. The American people need to see what's in here. That's a judge directly saying that whatever is in these files is so important to public understanding of potential crimes that it has to be released regardless of how embarrassing or damaging it might be to the people involved. The specific contents of the unsealed files are absolutely explosive based on the descriptions coming out of court. Financial transactions that don't add up, which suggests possible fraud, money laundering, or other financial crimes. Transcripts referencing illegal directives about Capitol security on January 6th, which implies Trump or his team may have deliberately weakened security, knowing violence was likely. Communications suggesting attempts to obstruct congressional proceedings, which is literally one of the crimes Trump has been charged with. grand jury materials that were previously sealed, which means evidence that prosecutors thought was strong enough to present to grand juries, and what's being described as bribery ledgers showing hush payments, which suggests Trump or his organization was paying people to stay quiet about things they knew. Any one of these categories of evidence would be damaging. All of them together, that's devastating. That's the kind of comprehensive evidence of criminal conduct that's very difficult to explain away or defend against. Trump's reaction to this unsealing tells you everything about how damaging he knows it is. Trump has sat through countless hours of court proceedings, depositions, hearings, situations where terrible things are being said about him and damaging evidence is being presented. He usually stays in the room and maintains at least a facade of confidence. But when Judge Keller announced he was unsealing these files, Trump apparently couldn't maintain that facade. He stormed out, just left the courtroom in what witnesses describe as visible rage and distress. That's not the action of someone who's confident they can explain everything. That's the action of someone who knows they're about to be exposed and can't stand to watch it happen. Trump's own behavior is evidence that these files contain things he desperately wanted to keep hidden. The congressional reaction has been swift and bipartisan to a degree that's remarkable. Democrats obviously are seizing on this, demanding investigations and calling for accountability. But what's really significant is that some Republicans are also expressing serious concerns. Senator Lisa Murkowski, who's been one of the more independent Republican voices, is quoted as saying, "We can't let sealed files hide corruption. The American people deserve the truth, no matter how high the office." That's a Republican senator essentially saying Trump should be held accountable based on this evidence. When you're losing even moderate Republicans who have generally tried to avoid directly attacking Trump, you know the evidence must be really damaging. The calls for arrests that are coming from multiple members of Congress, both Democrats and a few Republicans, show that people who've reviewed what's in these files think criminal charges are warranted immediately. The unsealing of grand jury materials is particularly significant from a legal perspective. Grand jury proceedings are supposed to be secret to protect the integrity of investigations. The fact that a judge is allowing these materials to be made public means she believes the public interest in transparency outweighs the normal need for secrecy. That only happens in extraordinary circumstances where the judge believes the public has a compelling need to know what evidence exists, and it suggests that what was presented to those grand juries was evidence of serious crimes, serious enough that keeping them secret would be a disservice to democracy and accountability. So why does this matter beyond just Trump's immediate legal troubles? Because this unsealing sets a precedent about transparency and accountability for powerful political figures. For years, Trump has used executive privilege, claims of national security, and aggressive litigation to keep damaging information hidden from public view. He's fought every subpoena, resisted every request for documents, and used the courts to delay and obstruct investigations. And largely, he's gotten away with it because judges have been reluctant to override claims of privilege or to force disclosure of sensitive materials. But Judge Keller just blew right through all of those defenses and said, no, the public needs to see this evidence regardless of how protected you think it should be. That's a powerful statement about judicial willingness to prioritize transparency over protecting powerful people. And it could embolden other judges in other cases to take similar approaches when defendants try to hide evidence behind claims of privilege or secrecy. All right, so let's dig into the specific categories of evidence that were unsealed and understand exactly why each one is so damaging, because the details matter enormously when you're talking about potential criminal conduct by a former president. Let's start with the financial records that allegedly don't add up. This is the kind of evidence that white-collar crime prosecutors love because numbers don't lie. If financial records show money going places it shouldn't go, or coming from sources that aren't legitimate, or transactions that are structured to avoid detection or reporting requirements, those are red flags for fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, or other financial crimes. The unsealed files apparently contain exactly this kind of problematic financial information. Now, we don't have all the specific details yet about what transactions are at issue or what they show, but the fact that prosecutors thought this evidence was important enough to present to grand juries and that a judge thought it was serious enough that the public needs to see it suggests these aren't just minor accounting errors. These are transactions that raise serious questions about whether Trump or his organization engaged in financial crimes. The transcripts referencing illegal directives about Capitol security on January 6 are potentially the most explosive evidence politically. One of the enduring questions about January 6 has been whether anyone in Trump's orbit deliberately weakened security at the Capitol, knowing that violence was likely. There have been allegations and theories about this for years, but concrete evidence has been elusive. If these unsealed transcripts show Trump advisors or Trump himself giving directives to reduce security, to delay National Guard deployment, or to otherwise make the Capitol more vulnerable, that's evidence of a deliberate plan to enable violence that transforms January 6th from a riot that got out of control into a planned attack where security was intentionally compromised. The legal implications are staggering because it would show premeditation and planning rather than just responding poorly to an unexpected situation. The communications suggesting attempts to obstruct congressional proceedings go directly to one of the federal charges Trump is facing. Obstruction of an official proceeding, in this case, the electoral vote certification, is a serious federal crime that carries significant prison time. To prove this charge, prosecutors need to show that Trump intended to obstruct a proceeding and took actions toward that goal. Communications showing Trump or his team discussing how to delay or disrupt the certification, how to create chaos that would prevent the count from finishing, how to pressure members of Congress to object, all of that is direct evidence of obstruction. And if these communications show Trump was directing this effort, it destroys any defense that he was just exercising his rights to challenge the election through legal means. The grand jury materials that were unsealed are significant because grand juries only see evidence that prosecutors believe is strong enough to potentially support criminal charges. Prosecutors don't present their weak evidence to grand juries, they present their best evidence. So whatever was in these grand jury materials represents prosecutors' strongest case against Trump on whatever issues the grand juries were examining. The fact that this evidence is now public means anyone can review it and judge for themselves whether the prosecutors had strong cases. It also means defense attorneys and Trump supporters can't claim anymore that prosecutors are just making wild allegations without evidence. The evidence is right there in the unsealed materials for everyone to see. The alleged bribery ledgers showing hush payments are particularly damning because they suggest a systematic effort to silence witnesses or victims. Hush payments aren't always illegal, sometimes they're just settlements of legitimate disputes. But when payments are made to cover up crimes or to obstruct investigations, they become evidence of additional crimes like witness tampering or obstruction of justice. The unsealed files apparently show a pattern of payments to various people in circumstances that look like Trump or his organization was trying to keep them quiet about things they knew. Who are these people? What did they know? Why were they paid to stay silent? These are questions the public and investigators will now be able to explore because the records are public. Judge Keller's rationale for unsealing deserves close examination because it reveals her thinking about the balance between transparency and secrecy. In her ruling, she apparently rejected every argument Trump's lawyers made for keeping the files sealed. National security. The judge found that nothing in the files genuinely threatened national security. That claim was just a pretext for avoiding embarrassment. Executive privilege. The judge determined that executive privilege doesn't protect criminal conduct and can't be used to hide evidence of crimes from the public. Privacy concerns. The judge decided that when someone holds high public office and is accused of serious crimes, privacy interests are outweighed by the public's right to know. This systematic rejection of every conceivable argument for secrecy sends a message that judges won't allow powerful defendants to hide behind legal doctrines that are being misused to avoid accountability. The timing of this unsealing is significant because it comes as Trump is facing multiple trials and investigations. Each new revelation of evidence affects the other cases. If the unsealed files show financial crimes, that could influence the New York financial fraud case. If they show obstruction, that strengthens Jack Smith's federal case. If they show anything related to Georgia, that helps the state prosecution there. So this isn't just evidence in one case, it's evidence that ripples across all of Trump's legal troubles and makes every case stronger. Prosecutors in different jurisdictions can now look at these unsealed files and potentially find evidence relevant to their cases that they didn't have before. The bipartisan nature of the congressional response, with even some Republicans calling for investigation and accountability, is remarkable and suggests the evidence is truly overwhelming. Republicans have been remarkably unified in defending Trump through 2 impeachments, multiple indictments, and constant scandals. For some of them to break ranks now and say the evidence in these files is too serious to ignore means they've seen something that even they can't defend. That could represent a turning point where Trump's grip on the Republican Party starts to weaken because party members realize that continued defense of him is politically and morally untenable. Lisa Murkowski's statement about not letting sealed files hide corruption is particularly significant because she's positioning herself and potentially other Republicans as caring more about truth and accountability than about protecting Trump. That's a political calculation that wouldn't make sense if the evidence wasn't genuinely damaging. Murkowski is basically saying she's reviewed the evidence and is serious enough that party loyalty can't justify ignoring it. Other Republicans who are in similar positions, representing more moderate constituencies, having some independence from Trump, might follow her lead once they see that breaking with Trump on this issue is politically viable. The demands for arrests coming from Congress are interesting from a legal process perspective. Congress doesn't have the power to arrest someone directly. That's a function of law enforcement. But when members of Congress call for arrests, they're signaling to prosecutors and law enforcement that they believe probable cause exists for criminal charges. They're also creating political pressure for action. If dozens of members of Congress are publicly saying Trump should be arrested based on this evidence, it becomes harder for prosecutors to decline bringing charges. The political dynamics shift to where not prosecuting requires explanation rather than prosecuting requiring justification. Trump's legal team's previous efforts to keep these files sealed now look like consciousness of guilt. They fought hard to prevent this evidence from becoming public, using every legal argument and delay tactic available. That level of effort to suppress evidence suggests they knew how damaging it was. You don't fight that hard to keep something secret unless you're afraid of what happens when it becomes public. And now that it's public, everyone can evaluate whether Trump's efforts to suppress were justified by legitimate concerns or were just attempts to hide evidence of crimes. The precedent this unsealing sets could affect other cases involving powerful defendants who try to hide behind privilege or secrecy. Other judges might look at how Judge Keller handled this case and conclude that when evidence of serious crimes exists, transparency should trump concerns about privilege or privacy. That could lead to more aggressive disclosure orders in cases involving politicians, corporate executives, or other powerful figures who've traditionally been able to use legal doctrines to avoid public scrutiny. Okay, so let's break down what happens next and what this unsealing means for Trump's legal future and for American politics more broadly, because this is a watershed moment that changes everything going forward. First, and most immediately, prosecutors in all of Trump's various cases now have access to evidence they might not have had before. Jack Smith, Fani Willis in Georgia, Alvin Bragg in New York, they can all review these unsealed files and potentially find evidence relevant to their cases. If there's anything in the financial records that supports the New York fraud case, Bragg's team will use it. If there's anything about the fake elector scheme or pressure on Georgia officials, Willis will incorporate it. If there's anything about January 6th or obstruction, Smith will add it to his already strong case. This unsealing creates opportunities for prosecutors to strengthen their cases in ways that can make convictions more likely. Trump's legal defense strategy has to completely change now that this evidence is public. His lawyers can no longer argue that allegations against him are speculative or based on weak evidence when there are actual documents showing financial irregularities, actual transcripts showing illegal directives, actual records of hush payments. They have to confront specific evidence and explain it or discredit it somehow. That's a much harder position to defend from than just attacking the credibility of prosecutors or witnesses. Documentary evidence is powerful because it's objective and contemporaneous. It was created at the time events happened, and it says what it says, regardless of anyone's memory or interpretation. The political implications are enormous, heading into 2026 and beyond. Democrats now have concrete evidence to point to when they argue Trump is corrupt and criminal. They don't have to rely on allegations or testimony. They can point to unsealed court records showing financial problems and illegal conduct. That's powerful campaign material that will be used extensively. And Republicans who continue defending Trump now have to explain why they're defending someone whose corruption has been documented in unsealed court files. That's a politically untenable position for many Republicans in competitive districts. For Trump personally, this unsealing represents a catastrophic breakdown of his ability to control information and manage his legal problems. Trump's entire approach to his legal troubles has been about controlling the narrative, hiding evidence, attacking prosecutors, and using the legal system to delay and obstruct. But Judge Keller just blew through all of that and forced everything into the open. Trump can't hide this evidence. He can't spin it away. He can't prevent people from seeing it. It's out there now, and he has to live with the consequences. That loss of control is probably more psychologically difficult for Trump than the actual content of the evidence because he's built his entire life around being able to control narratives and avoid accountability. The congressional calls for arrests create real pressure on law enforcement to act. The Department of Justice operates with some independence from political pressure, but when members of Congress from both parties are saying someone should be arrested based on evidence they've reviewed, that creates an expectation of action. If DOJ doesn't bring charges after this evidence becomes public, they'll have to explain why. That shifts the burden in a way that makes prosecution more likely. Previously, prosecutors had to justify why they should charge a former president, a high bar given the unprecedented nature of such charges. Now, they might have to justify why they're not charging him when the evidence appears so strong. For the American public, this unsealing provides transparency about potential corruption at the highest levels of government. Citizens can now review the evidence themselves and make their own judgments about Trump's conduct rather than having to rely on prosecutors' characterizations or media reports. That direct access to evidence is important for democratic accountability. People deserve to know what their leaders did and whether those actions were criminal. Judge Keller's decision to unseal prioritizes that public interest in knowing over Trump's interest in keeping embarrassing or incriminating information hidden. The impact on Trump's business and financial interests could be substantial. If the unsealed financial records show fraud or other financial crimes, that could expose Trump Organization to additional civil lawsuits, regulatory enforcement actions, or criminal charges beyond what Trump personally faces. Business partners might distance themselves. Banks might be more reluctant to lend. Insurance companies might raise rates or refuse coverage. The financial ripple effects of this evidence becoming public could be significant even apart from the legal consequences. Trump's ability to run for office again is affected by this unsealing both legally and politically. Legally, if the evidence leads to additional charges and convictions, Trump could face incarceration or other penalties that make campaigning difficult or impossible. Politically, running for president while newly unsealed evidence shows financial corruption and illegal conduct is extremely difficult. Voters who might have given Trump the benefit of the doubt before now have to confront actual evidence of wrongdoing. That changes the political calculus significantly. The precedent about judicial willingness to override privilege claims is important for future accountability. If powerful people know that judges will unseal evidence when public interest demands it, they might be more cautious about engaging in conduct they wouldn't want exposed. Or they might be more careful about creating documentary evidence of their wrongdoing. Either way, this ruling makes it harder for powerful defendants to hide behind claims of privilege or secrecy. That's good for accountability, but it also raises questions about how to balance transparency with legitimate needs for confidentiality in certain contexts. For Trump's allies and co-conspirators, this unsealing creates serious legal jeopardy. If the documents show other people participating in schemes or crimes, those people now face exposure and potential prosecution. Some might decide to cooperate with prosecutors to protect themselves. Others might lawyer up and fight, but all of them have to confront the reality that evidence of their conduct is now public and they can be held accountable for it. This could lead to a cascade of cooperation as people try to get ahead of charges by providing testimony against others. The media coverage of this unsealing will dominate news cycles for days or weeks as journalists dig through the files and report on what they find. Every revelation will generate new stories, new analysis, new political reactions. This sustained attention keeps Trump's legal problems front and center in public consciousness and makes it harder for him or his supporters to change the subject to other issues. The drip, drip, drip of new revelations from the unsealed files could be more damaging politically than one big dump of information because it keeps the story alive longer. Here's the bottom line. After examining all the angles, Judge Keller's decision to unseal this massive trove of evidence is a game-changing moment in Trump's legal saga. The files contain financial records showing irregularities, transcripts suggesting illegal directives about January 6 security, communications about obstructing Congress, grand jury materials, and apparent bribery ledgers. Trump's reaction storming out of court shows how devastating he knows this is. Congress is responding with bipartisan calls for investigation and even arrest. Prosecutors now have evidence they can use across multiple cases, and the public finally has access to documents that show what Trump and his team were actually doing behind closed doors. This unsealing sets a precedent that powerful defendants can't hide behind privilege or secrecy when serious evidence of crimes exists. Whatever happens next in Trump's legal cases, this moment represents a fundamental shift toward transparency and accountability that will affect not just Trump, but how we handle corruption at the highest levels of government for years to come.